Good day to you all, podcasters, social media enthusiasts, the general populace, and the world wide web. It's Lawrence here, and I hope you're having a wonderful day as we delve into another fairly standardized topic in the podcast world of Africans in their diaspora. The question that I have today is when I look at what's happening in Nairobi, in Kenya, 2 years ago, Gen Z youngsters marched against the cost of living and were subsequently gunned down. Several people died. They're currently commemorating that second anniversary. And the last 2 years have seen about 100 people die through demonstration. This is the sort of thing that happens in Kenya quite frequently. Kenyans are very robust at protesting without much benefit or gain from these protests. South Africans, on the other hand, have grievances and they protest. The government does not immediately step in and start shooting like they did in Kenya. Why is there a difference? What's the difference between two organizations or the two governments? Kenyans willing to shoot down their own people, and South African surprisingly docile to the whole thing, and sometimes joining in the protests and leaving the protesters rather to do their will. Now the contrast is real; it's not absolute. The Kenya and South Africa situations are different. The Kenyans treat protests as a threat to government authority. So during the colonial period and after independence, government frequently relied on the police to suppress opposition. Although the country adopted a progressive constitution in 2010, many human rights organizations argue that constitutional culture has changed very slowly compared to the actual law itself. Now, with the Gen Z protests, they were initially peaceful against the proposed finance bill, taxes, and the rising cost of living. As the crowds grew, protesters breached parliamentary compound. Parts of parliament were set alight, and security forces responded with live ammunition. The president, William Ruto, he withdrew the finance bill, but dozens of people had already been killed. And the situation is no different now in the second anniversary. South Africa has a different political tradition. The governing African National Congress emerged from liberation, and their own members had spent decades organizing demonstrations and so on. So as a result, they enshrined into the constitution the right to protest. Political leaders generally recognize protest as a legitimate part of democracy. Civil society organizations and the courts are active in challenging police issues and abuses. Now, South Africa doesn't mean that they don't use force. They did use the force in the Marikana massacre, in which police killed 34 striking minors. And that was one of the most serious examples of post-apartheid state violence. There have been some deaths during service delivery protests. However, it's uncommon in South Africa for police to respond with live rounds. Another important distinction is how governments interpret protests. As I said, the Gen Z movement in Kenya evolved beyond just opposing tax increases. It became an anti-corruption, anti-government, leaderless, and it was organized through social media, etc. South Africa protests, although they're quite disruptive, they're normally quite localized and focus on issues like electricity, housing, water, municipal services, wages, and transport. The government often expects these processes to die on their own through negotiations or just local engagement, and they don't view them as a threat to national government. police professionalism and oversight. South Africa generally has a stronger judicial oversight, more independent media, established mechanisms for investigating police misconduct, and larger, more expanded and experienced public order policing units. These institutions, while imperfect, they're often criticized, but they do create a greater scrutiny when used. Kenya has similar bodies, but their accounting is slower and less consistent. Now, why do South African police appear to be sympathetic to protests? And normally that's because many officers come from the same communities as the protesters. They may share frustrations over unemployment and poor public services. Basically, they have the same grievances. Public order policing doctrine generally emphasizes negotiation before force, and union and labor protests have become a familiar feature of South African political life. However, police do intervene, sometimes forcefully. Final observation is that one point worth noting is that Kenyan protests have sometimes achieved immediate policy concessions, and obviously they come at a human cost. So, like for instance, the 2024 finance bill was withdrawn, and some few observers expected this not to happen. They did see it happen. By contrast, South African protests are tolerated for longer and just produce only minimal and marginal results. And the situation normally just drags on and on. So Kenyans do pay a higher price for their protests. It not be accurate to say they protest without any gain. The protests have forced significant concessions. And the issue of that difference is quite stark and is quite relevant. But there's no evidence that in South Africa that the government has a policy of encouraging police to collude with protesters in order to divert attention from the political issues. Basically, the reason being that immigration is a political calculation. In South Africa, it's a highly contentious issue, and parties have sometimes used the issue to basically for their own political gains. And sometimes when you look at police in South Africa over a large country and a large population, they tend to be under-resourced, and unsure of the legal basis for intervention. If they intervene, something's likely to happen to them. They could be brought before the courts. And since the Marikana massacre, there's been scrutiny on the use of force in South Africa, which was quite a sad situation. Basically, state capacity is also another issue. Basically, the shortage of police, uneven training, resource constraints. Sometimes police respond robustly in some of these protests, and sometimes they appear overwhelmed or inconsistent. That consistency doesn't mean coordination with the protesters just simply because they just can't handle it, more or less. Well, again, having said that, it now remains to be seen whether current situation in South Africa will ease to some extent with the departure of about 13,000 migrants, and what the 1st of July holds as a deadline, or the 30th of June. And what the police have said is that they're ready to face any challenges and any issues, and they're mobilizing to a very large extent, which is quite a costly exercise, I would imagine. But if you're in Kenya and you protest, just be careful. The police could shoot you. Sorry, with that very calamitous and miserable finality, I end the podcast by saying, I hope you have a nice day and you understood the differences between Kenya and South Africa with how they handle protests. And hopefully we'll meet again in the future, provided you keep away from protests and stay alive. Thank you for your time. Bye-bye.